So in this video, what we're going to do is actually look at what we can do now. Now we're beginning to get control of our mind back. How we're going to change our perspective. Because the perspective that you have on life will determine the experience that you have. So we can have the perspective of depression, which is I hate my life, to I love my life. And this is essentially where we want to go. We want to get to a place where we can say, I love being alive. I love my life. I love being alive. And so to be able to do that, we have to change the perspective that we have on life. And that begins by getting control of the thoughts that we think. Now, this is a typical, let me rub that out. This is a typical way that we tend to live life. Okay, so we're going along in life and something happens that we call a trigger. Okay, so let's say I don't know, your day is going along fine, and then you begin to have an argument with your wife. You have a discussion with your wife, with your partner. Okay, a trigger happens. Now, usually what happens when we come across a trigger, no, in fact, I'm going to change that. Let's go back to the story about the girl that got bit by the dog. Okay, the girl's walking along the road and she hits a trigger. There's somebody walking towards her with a dog, and she gets triggered. Now, what tends to happen is that when we get the trigger, our subconscious looks inside of itself for the automatic reaction, which is fear of the dog, right? And when we don't have control of our thoughts, when we don't have control of what's going on inside of our minds, our subconscious takes over and begins to tell us what's happening. But once we begin to get control of our thoughts, what we can do is here, we can interrupt that process, the subconscious process, and say no. No. You have the power of your mind, the conscious mind, to actually stop a subconscious process if you're aware that it's going to happen. Now, of course, you have to become aware, like this girl, that you have to become aware of the fact that your fear of dogs is coming from an internal story, and then be able to say no, and then be able to think new thoughts around the situation, like, not all dogs bite, you know. And once you begin to think the new thoughts, you can then begin to have the new experience, which is she can stroke the dog and the dog doesn't bite her. And that story then feeds back into the subconscious, and the story begins to change then from a story of fear to a story of love. Okay, which is in essence what we're wanting to do. So the way that we work through changing the story to begin to get through the depression is to find out the things in our lives that trigger us into these negative responses, and begin to change the story around, the thoughts around, and the feelings around, and the actions around these negative things. And the way that we accelerate this process is by actively searching out for the things in our life, like a sniper, and finding the things in our lives that are causing us to feel like shit, and begin to actively change the stories around them. You know, actively search out the triggers, like, because quite often, like the girl in this story, she would probably avoid being around dogs. Like if there are dogs around, she would actively avoid the trigger. And quite often in life, that's what we do. We avoid the triggers to not go through an uncomfortable situation. We avoid the triggers. So we avoid the difficult conversations with our partner. We avoid the difficult conversations with our kids. We avoid the idea of changing jobs because we don't want to go through the pain of having to change to another job. But in order to be able to get out of the depression, we must be willing to challenge the triggers that are causing us to be depressed, that are causing our mind to work the way that it needs to work. And this doesn't mean that you have to go into your past and begin to psychoanalyze trauma or anything like that. It just means that you study the things that make you react and be who you are. Ask yourself the questions: why am I who I am? How did I get here? What is it in me that is causing me to be this way? And actively change these things. See you in the next video.